The summer of 1878 brought a heat so fierce to the Wyoming Territory that even the rattlesnakes sought refuge in the shadows of the rocky outcroppings. Amelia Rose Montgomery wiped the sweat from her brow as she surveyed the charred remains of what had once been her family's homestead. 3 days prior, while she'd been in town selling eggs and butter, raiders had come. They'd taken everything: her father, her stepmother, and her 2 young half-brothers. All that remained was Ash, a single horse they'd overlooked in the far pasture, and the clothes on her back. Grief had no place in survival. Not yet. Amelia had learned that lesson early in her 22 years of life. She gathered what little hadn't been destroyed: a singed family Bible, a cast iron skillet, and her father's hunting rifle, and secured them to her horse. The nearest town, Clearwater Springs, was a half-day's ride. With no homestead left to defend and no family left to mourn properly, she had little choice but to seek shelter there, at least until she could formulate a plan. The town materialized like a mirage in the distance, as the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. Clearwater Springs was little more than a dusty main street lined with false-fronted buildings: a general store, a saloon, a small church, the sheriff's office, and a boarding house that doubled as the town's only restaurant. It wasn't much, but it represented civilization in this untamed corner of the territory. Amelia rode straight to the sheriff's office, dismounting with a weariness that penetrated to her bones. Sheriff Barnes was a portly man with a salt and pepper mustache that seemed too big for his face. He looked up from his desk as the bell above the door announced her arrival. "Miss Montgomery," he said, his expression shifting from surprise to concern. "I heard about your folks. Terrible business. What's being done about it?" Amelia asked, her voice steady despite the hollow feeling in her chest. Sheriff Barnes cleared his throat and adjusted his collar. "Well now, Miss Montgomery, we've got limited resources. I sent a telegram to Cheyenne, but I'm afraid they've got their hands full with the railroad disputes. They can't spare any men." "So nothing, then," Amelia said flatly. "I wouldn't put it like that. I've asked around, put out word, but whoever did this is likely long gone." Amelia stared at him, taking in the way he wouldn't quite meet her eyes. "Do you at least have any idea who might have done it?" the sheriff shrugged. "Could be anyone. Drifters passing through. Maybe those Cassidy boys from up north. Hard to say." "Hard to say because you haven't looked," Amelia replied, her patience fraying. "Now see here, Miss Montgomery," Sheriff Barnes began, his tone sharpening. "I understand you're upset, but I won't be spoken to like—" The door swung open behind her, cutting off the sheriff's indignation. Amelia turned to see a tall man silhouetted against the bright sunlight. As he stepped inside, his features came into focus: weather-beaten face, sharp blue eyes, and dark hair that curled slightly beneath a well-worn Stetson. Dust clung to his denim pants and cotton shirt, marking him as someone who'd been on the trail for some time. "Sheriff," the man nodded, his voice a low rumble that seemed to come from deep in his chest. His eyes shifted to Amelia briefly before returning to the lawman. "I've brought in that stallion thief you were after. He's tied to my horse outside." Sheriff Barnes practically leapt to his feet, clearly relieved at the interruption. "Vaughn Blackwood, I'll be damned. Didn't expect to see you back in these parts." "Just passing through," the man Vaughn replied, his gaze once again finding Amelia. "Miss Montgomery, this here's Vaughn Blackwood. Best tracker in 3 territories. Used to be a U.S. Marshal before he decided the government wasn't paying him enough." The sheriff chuckled at his own joke, though Vaughn didn't join in. "Vaughn, this is Miss Amelia Montgomery. She's had some trouble out at her family's homestead." Amelia saw something flicker in Vaughn's eyes: recognition, perhaps. The Montgomery place out on Eagle Creek, I heard about that on my way in. Sorry for your loss, madam. Thank you, Amelia replied automatically, studying him. There was something in his manner that set him apart from the typical drifters and cowboys that pass through Clearwater Springs. A stillness, a sense of contained power that reminded her of a mountain lion she'd once observed from a distance, calm, watchful, and undoubtedly dangerous when provoked. Sheriff Barnes bustled past them both. Let me go see to this thief. Been after him for weeks. He disappeared outside, leaving Amelia alone with Vaughn Blackwood. Sheriff's not going to do anything about who killed your family, is he? Vaughn asked quietly after a moment. Amelia's jaw tightened. Apparently not. Vaughn nodded, as if her answer confirmed something he already knew. Where are you staying? I haven't figured that out yet. Just arrived in town. Mrs. Wilson at the boarding house is fair. Tell her I sent you, she might give you a decent rate. He tipped his hat and turned to leave. Mr. Blackwood, Amelia called after him. He paused at the door, looking back at her over his shoulder. You track people for a living, sometimes. What would it cost to track the men who killed my family? Vaughn studied her for a long moment, those blue eyes seeming to assess everything about her, her determination, her resources, her will. More than you can likely afford, Miss Montgomery. I have $23 to my name, a good horse and my father's rifle, Amelia said. I can also cook and shoot straight. If that's not enough money, I'll work off the rest. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. $23 won't even cover supplies for the trail. He seemed about to say more, then shook his head. Get yourself settled at the boarding house. We can talk more later if you're still interested. Before Amelia could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone in the sheriff's office with her grief and her anger, and the first fragile seed of hope she'd felt since seeing the smoke rising from her home 3 days ago. Mrs. Wilson was indeed fair, if a bit overly curious about Amelia's circumstances. The boarding house was clean and simple, with 6 rooms upstairs and a dining room on the main floor that served meals to boarders and townsfolk alike. Amelia secured a small room at the back of the house for 50 cents a night, with meals included. Terrible business about your family, Mrs. Wilson said as she showed Amelia to her room. She was a thin woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. Sheriff ought to do more, if you ask me, but he's never been one to stir up trouble. Not since that business with the cattle rustlers 2 years back. What business was that? Amelia asked, setting her meager belongings on the narrow bed. Oh, a gang came through, took half the Prescott herd. Sheriff organized a posse to go after them, but they rode into an ambush. 3 men killed, including the sheriff's brother-in-law. He's been cautious ever since. Mrs. Wilson shook her head. Dinner's at 6 sharp. Don't be late, I don't hold food for stragglers. Alone in the small room, Amelia sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself a moment of grief. She didn't cry, tears seemed an indulgence she couldn't afford, but she closed her eyes and remembered her father's laugh, her stepmother's kind hands, and her little brother's gap-toothed smiles. The pain was a physical thing, pressing against her ribs and making it hard to breathe. When she opened her eyes again, the sun was lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the worn floorboards. She washed her face in the basin provided, changed into her one clean dress, and headed downstairs for dinner. The dining room was nearly full, mostly with men, ranch hands, shopkeepers, and travelers passing through. Conversation quieted briefly as she entered, then resumed with a few curious glances her way. Amelia kept her head high as she took the only available seat at a table near the back. Vaughn Blackwood sat across from her, a half-empty plate in front of him. His hat was off, revealing thick dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. Up close, She could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, a man who spent most of his life outdoors. "Miss Montgomery," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "Mr. Blackwood." "Mrs." Wilson bustled over with a plate of stew and a slice of bread, setting it in front of Amelia. "There you are, dear. Coffee's on the sideboard if you want it." "Thank you," Amelia said, suddenly aware of how hungry she was. She hadn't eaten a proper meal since before discovering the homestead in ruins. She ate in silence for a few minutes, aware of Vaughn's occasional glances. Finally, he spoke. "Have you reconsidered your plan to hunt down your family's killers?" Amelia set down her spoon. "No." "Have you reconsidered helping me?" A smile briefly touched his lips. "I never said I would help you. You never said you wouldn't either." Vaughn leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating blue eyes. "It's dangerous work, Miss Montgomery. These men, whoever they are, have already shown they're willing to kill, and the trail's getting colder by the day. I understand the risks. Do you?" His voice was quiet but intense. "Because from where I'm sitting, you look like a woman who's never been more than 10 miles from home, who's used to a certain kind of life. The kind with regular meals and a roof overhead. Tracking men like these means sleeping rough, going hungry sometimes, facing weather and wildlife and worse. It means possibly killing or being killed." His words stung because they held truth. Amelia had indeed rarely ventured far from home, but she wasn't as sheltered as he assumed. "My mother died when I was 8. My father remarried when I was 12. I've run that homestead alongside him since I was old enough to carry water. I've faced down wolves at our livestock, survived 3 winters so harsh we had to burn furniture to stay warm, and once stitched up my own arm when there was no one else to do it." She pushed up her sleeve to show a jagged scar along her forearm. "I'm not afraid of discomfort, Mr. Blackwood. I'm only afraid of letting the men who murdered my family go unpunished." Vaughn's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did, a flicker of respect, perhaps. He nodded once. "Fair enough, but my fee stands. I can't work for promises." Amelia straightened her spine. "What if I offered you a partnership instead? I know the territory as well as anyone. I can cook, hunt, and as I said, I'm a good shot. We split whatever we find along the way." "And what exactly do you think we'll find along the way that's worth having?" "The men who did this might have taken valuables from our home. And if they're the type to raid homesteads, they likely have stolen goods from other places too." Vaughn considered this, tapping one finger against the side of his coffee cup. "It's not much of an offer. It's all I have," Amelia replied simply. After a long moment he sighed. "I'll think about it. In the meantime, I suggest you get some rest. You look like you haven't slept in days." It was true. Sleep had been elusive since the attack, and what little she'd managed had been haunted by nightmares. "Thank you for the concern," she said stiffly, finishing her stew. Vaughn stood, placing his hat back on his head. "Good night, Miss Montgomery." Amelia watched him leave, wondering if she'd ever see him again or if, like the sheriff, he'd decide her troubles weren't worth the effort. It didn't matter, she told herself firmly. With or without help, she would find the men responsible. She would see justice done, even if she had to do it alone. That night, lying on the narrow boarding house bed, Amelia stared at the ceiling and tried to formulate a plan. She had limited resources and knowledge. The raiders had come from the north, according to the tracks she'd seen, but that covered a vast territory. Without help, she could wander for months and never find them. Sleep eventually claimed her, but it was fitful and filled with dreams of fire and screams. She woke before dawn, her heart pounding and her nightdress damp with sweat. Rather than try to sleep again, she dressed and made her way downstairs. The dining room was empty at this early hour, but she could hear Mrs. Wilson in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. "You're up with the roosters," Mrs. Wilson commented when Amelia poked her head into the kitchen. "Coffee's hot if you want some. Breakfast won't be ready for another hour, though." "Thank you," Amelia said, pouring herself a cup. "Do you need any help?" Mrs. Wilson raised an eyebrow. "You looking for work, girl?" "I might be, at least for a little while." The older woman nodded approvingly. "Could use an extra pair of hands. Got a group of cattle buyers coming through next week and the place will be packed. Pays $2 a week plus room and board." It wasn't much, but it would allow Amelia to stay in town while she figured out her next move. "I accept." "Good. You can start by kneading that dough over there. We'll need extra biscuits this morning." Amelia had just finished setting the dough aside to rise when the back door opened, and Vaughn Blackwood stepped into the kitchen. He looked surprised to see her there. "Mr. Blackwood, Mrs. Wilson greeted him warmly. "Early as always, coffee's fresh." "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson." He nodded to Amelia. "Miss Montgomery, Mr. Blackwood," Amelia replied, wiping flour from her hands. "I didn't realize you were staying here as well." "Just for a few days," he said, accepting the coffee. Mrs. Wilson handed him. "I've been offered a job tracking some horses stolen from the Hargrove Ranch." Amelia felt a flicker of disappointment, so he had decided not to help her after all. "I see. Well, I wish you luck with that." Vaughn took a sip of his coffee, watching her over the rim of the cup. "Actually, I was hoping to speak with you about that. In private, if possible." Mrs. Wilson glanced between them with interest. "You two can use the parlor. No one's in there this time of day." The parlor was a small room off the main entrance, furnished with 2 worn armchairs and a faded settee. Amelia took one of the armchairs, her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. Vaughn remained standing, his tall frame making the room seem smaller. "I've been thinking about your proposal," he said without preamble, "and I have a counter-offer. I'll help you track down the men who killed your family, but first, you help me with this job for the Hargroves. They're paying good money to recover their horses, $50 if I bring them back within the week. We split it, and then use that money for supplies to go after your raiders." Amelia frowned. "That would delay going after my family's killers. The trail is already growing cold." "The trail is already cold," Vaughn corrected. "A few more days won't make much difference, but having proper supplies and funds will make all the difference in our chances of success." She wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. $23 wouldn't get them far, and without proper preparations, they'd be at a severe disadvantage. "How long do you think this horse tracking business will take?" 3 days, maybe 4. "The thieves aren't professionals, they're local boys who think they can make easy money selling horses across the territory line. I already have a good idea where they're headed." Amelia considered this. A few days' delay for a better chance at success seemed a reasonable trade-off. "All right, Mr. Blackwood, I accept your counter-offer." Vaughn nodded, a flicker of approval in his eyes. "Good. We leave at noon. Pack light, 1 bedroll, 1 change of clothes, and whatever personal items you can't do without. I'll see to the rest." "I'll be ready," Amelia promised. "One more thing," Vaughn said, his expression serious. "When we're on the trail, you follow my lead. No arguments, no questions. If I tell you to do something, you do it immediately. This isn't negotiable." Amelia bristled at his tone. "I'm not a child, Mr. Blackwood." "No, but you are inexperienced in this kind of work. I need to know you'll listen when it matters." She wanted to protest further, but she recognized the practicality of his demand. "Fine. I'll follow your lead as long as your decisions make sense." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Fair enough. Noon, Miss Montgomery. Don't be late." True to her word, Amelia was ready at noon, her few possessions packed in a small satchel, her father's rifle cleaned and loaded. She'd left a note for Mrs. Wilson explaining her sudden departure and promising to return to work at the boarding house if things didn't pan out with Vaughn. Vaughn himself was waiting by the stables, already mounted on a powerful bay gelding. A second horse, a sturdy chestnut mare, stood saddled beside him. "The mare's yours for the duration," he said as Amelia approached. "She's steady and sure-footed. What about your horse?" "I left her with the livery stable. She needs rest. She's been through a lot these past few days." Amelia secured her satchel to the saddle and mounted with practiced ease. The mare shifted beneath her, adjusting to her weight, but remained calm. "She seems well trained." "She is. Her name's Penny." Vaughn turned his horse toward the north edge of town. "The thieves are headed for the Montana border. If we push hard, we can catch them before they cross it." They rode in silence for the first hour, leaving Clearwater Springs behind and entering the rolling grasslands that stretched toward the distant mountains. The summer heat was intense, but a steady breeze made it bearable. Amelia found herself studying Vaughn's profile as he rode slightly ahead of her, the strong line of his jaw, the way he sat easy in the saddle like a man who'd spent most of his life on horseback. "How long were you a marshal?" she asked, breaking the silence. Vaughn glanced back at her. 5 years. Quit 2 years ago." "Why?" He was quiet for so long that Amelia thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I got tired of following orders that didn't make sense, and tired of watching guilty men go free because they had money or connections." "So now you work for whoever pays you." "I work for whoever's cause I believe in," he corrected. "Money's necessary, but it's not my only consideration." Amelia digested this. "And you believe in recovering stolen horses?" A hint of a smile crossed his face. "I believe in setting things right when I can. The Hargroves are good people. They treat their hands fairly and help their neighbors. They didn't deserve to have their livelihood stolen." "Just as my family didn't deserve to be murdered," Amelia said quietly. Vaughn's expression sobered. "No, they didn't." They lapsed into silence again, but it was a more comfortable one. As the afternoon wore on, Vaughn began pointing out signs of the horse thieves' passage: broken branches, distinctive hoof prints, a campsite hastily abandoned. "They're not trying very hard to hide their trail," Amelia observed as they examined the remains of a fire. "Like I said, they're amateurs, local boys who saw an opportunity. They probably think no one will bother coming after them." Vaughn knelt, touching the ashes. "This is from last night. We're gaining on them." They made camp as twilight deepened into night, finding a sheltered spot near a small creek. Vaughn efficiently gathered wood for a fire while Amelia unsaddled the horses and set out their bedrolls. There was an easy rhythm to their movements, as if they'd done this together many times before. Vaughn produced jerky, hardtack, and coffee from his saddlebags. "Not much of a meal," he apologized, "but it'll keep us going." "I've had worse," Amelia replied, accepting her share. The food was simple but filling, and the coffee hot and strong. As they sat by the fire, the vast Wyoming sky spread above them, stars emerging like diamonds scattered across black velvet. The vastness of it all made Amelia's troubles seem both insignificant and overwhelming at the same time. "Tell me about your family," Vaughn said suddenly. Amelia looked up, surprised by the request. "Why?" "Because when we find the men who killed them, I want to know who I'm avenging." She stared into the fire, memories washing over her. "My father was strong, not just physically but in spirit. He believed in building something that would last, something he could pass down to his children. After my mother died, it was just the two of us for years. Then he met Sarah during a supply run to Cheyenne. She was a widow with no children, working as a seamstress. They married 6 months later." Amelia smiled faintly at the memory. "I was wary at first. I'd been the woman of the house for so long I wasn't sure I wanted to share that role, but Sarah was kind, patient. She never tried to replace my mother, just carved out her own place in our lives. The twins, Thomas and Timothy, came 2 years later. They were 10 now, full of mischief and laughter. Her voice caught on the past tense, the reality of their loss hitting her anew. She took a deep breath. They were good people. They worked hard. They didn't deserve what happened to them. Vaughn was watching her with an unreadable expression. No, they didn't, he agreed quietly. And the men who did this will answer for it. I promise you that. There was something in his voice, a certainty, a resolve that Amelia found herself believing. Thank you. Get some sleep, he said, rising to his feet. I'll take first watch. I'll wake you in 4 hours. Amelia wanted to protest that a watch wasn't necessary. They'd seen no sign of other travelers all day, but she remembered her promise to follow his lead. Instead, she nodded and settled into her bedroll, the day's riding having left her more tired than she'd realized. She fell asleep watching the firelight play across Vaughn's features as he sat sentinel against the vast darkness of the Wyoming night. Morning came with a gentle nudge to her shoulder. Amelia opened her eyes to find Vaughn kneeling beside her, the gray light of dawn just beginning to filter through the trees. Time to move, he said simply, already fully dressed and alert despite having taken the second watch. They broke camp quickly and efficiently, sharing a breakfast of jerky and the last of the coffee before mounting up and continuing north. The day promised to be even hotter than the previous one, the sun already blazing in a cloudless sky. We'll reach them by midday if they've kept to the pace they've been setting, Vaughn said as they rode. When we do, let me do the talking. These boys are likely to be scared and stupid, which is a dangerous combination. You think they'll surrender the horses peacefully? Amelia asked. If they're smart, they will. But I've rarely met horse thieves who were smart. By mid-morning, the signs of their quarry were fresh trampled grass, clear hoof prints, even a discarded whiskey bottle that couldn't have been there more than a few hours. Vaughn grew more alert, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. They crested a small rise and spotted them in the valley below 3 young men with a dozen horses, making their way along a winding creek. They were moving at a leisurely pace, clearly not expecting pursuit. Vaughn held up a hand, signaling Amelia to stop. We'll approach from downwind. Follow my lead and keep your hand near that rifle, but don't draw it unless I do. They circled wide, approaching the creek at a point ahead of the thieves' path. Vaughn positioned them behind a stand of cottonwoods, where they could see without being seen. As the 3 men and their stolen horses drew closer, Amelia could make out their features. None looked older than 20, with the awkward, unfinished appearance of boys not yet grown into men. When the thieves were within 50 yards, Vaughn nudged his horse forward, emerging from the trees with an easy confidence. Amelia followed, her heart hammering in her chest. "Morning, gentlemen," Vaughn called, his voice pleasant but carrying an underlying steel that made the 3 young men pull up short. "Fine day for a ride." The oldest of the 3, a lanky youth with a patchy attempt at a beard, reached instinctively for the gun at his hip. "Who are you?" "Name's Vaughn Blackwood. This is Miss Montgomery. We're here about those horses you're leading, specifically the ones with the Hargrove brand." The 3 exchanged nervous glances. The youngest, barely more than a boy, looked ready to bolt. "Don't know what you're talking about," the bearded one said, his hand still hovering near his gun. "These are our horses." "Is that so?" Vaughn's tone remained conversational. "Then you won't mind showing me the bill of sale. Mr. Hargrove is quite particular about documenting his transactions." The 3rd thief, a stocky young man with a scar across his cheek, spoke up. "We don't need no bill of sale. Possession's 9/10 of the law." An interesting legal theory, Vaughn replied. Unfortunately, horse theft is still hanging a fence in this territory, legal theories notwithstanding. The word hanging had an immediate effect. The youngest thief's face went pale and even the bearded leader looked shaken. Now, Vaughn continued, I'm authorized to offer you boys a deal. Return the horses and Mr. Hargrove won't press charges. You can ride away on your own mounts. Or his hand moved casually to rest on his holstered pistol. We can do this the hard way, which ends with you three in a territorial prison, or worse. The three thieves exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. For a moment, Amelia thought they might actually choose to fight. Then the bearded one's shoulders slumped. Fine, he muttered. Take the damn horses. They're more trouble than they're worth anyway. Vaughn nodded. Wise choice. Miss Montgomery, if you'd be so kind as to gather the leads. Amelia rode forward, collecting the lead ropes from the reluctant thieves. As she did, she noticed the youngest watching her with a peculiar expression, half fear, half fascination. You really gonna let us go? He asked, his voice cracking slightly. That's the deal, Vaughn confirmed. But I suggest you find more honest work in the future. Not everyone will be as forgiving as Mr. Hargrove. The three thieves didn't need to be told twice. They mounted their own horses, three scrappy-looking animals clearly not part of the Hargrove herd, and rode off at a gallop, casting nervous glances over their shoulders until they disappeared over a distant rise. That was almost too easy, Amelia remarked as she secured the last of the lead ropes. Most confrontations are, when handled right, Vaughn replied. Violence is rarely necessary when the threat of it is clear enough. They began the journey back to Clearwater Springs, the string of recovered horses following behind them. The animals were in good condition. The thieves had at least had sense enough not to run them too hard. Will we make it back by nightfall? Amelia asked, looking at the position of the sun. Vaughn shook his head. Not with this many horses. We'll need to make camp again. But we should reach town by midday tomorrow. They made slower progress with the recovered herd, stopping more frequently to rest the animals and ensure none strayed. By sunset, they'd covered perhaps half the distance back to Clearwater Springs. They made camp near a small pond that provided water for themselves and the horses. As they sat by the fire that evening, Amelia found herself studying Vaughn's profile again. There was something compelling about him, not just his physical presence, which was undeniably impressive, but the quiet competence with which he moved through the world. He seemed to belong out here in this wild country in a way few people did. You're staring, he observed without looking at her. Amelia felt heat rise to her cheeks. I was just thinking. About how differently today could have gone. Those boys could have chosen to fight. They could have been hurt, or we could have been. Vaughn nodded slowly. That's always a possibility in this line of work. But most people, when presented with a clear choice between an easy way out and a painful one, will choose the easy way. Is that what you expect from the men who killed my family? That they'll choose the easy way out? His expression darkened. No. Men who murder families aren't looking for easy ways out. They're looking to inflict pain. That's a different kind of person altogether. You've dealt with men like that before. It wasn't a question, but Vaughn answered anyway. Yes, more than I care to remember. And how did those encounters end? He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. Usually with someone dead. The blunt answer sent a chill through Amelia despite the warmth of the fire. I've never killed anyone, she said softly. Vaughn's gaze shifted to her face. Let's hope you never have to, but if it comes to that, if it's them or you, don't hesitate. Hesitation gets you killed. Is that what happened when you were a marshal? Someone hesitated, pain flashed across his features, so briefly she might have imagined it. "My partner did cost him his life." "I'm sorry," Amelia said, wishing she hadn't asked. Vaughn shrugged, the motion tense. "It was a long time ago." They lapsed into silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. When Vaughn finally spoke again, his voice was gentler than she'd heard it before. "You should get some sleep. Tomorrow will be another long day." Amelia nodded, settling into her bedroll. But sleep was elusive, her mind filled with thoughts of Vaughn's past, her family's killers, and the violence that seemed to permeate this beautiful, harsh land. The next morning dawned clear and hot, another scorching summer day in the making. They reached Clearwater Springs just after noon, leading the recovered horses down the main street to the livery stable. Their arrival caused quite a stir. Townsfolk emerged from shops and homes to watch the procession, and by the time they reached the livery, a small crowd had gathered. James Hargrove himself was there, a barrel-chested man with a shock of white hair and a prosperous look about him. His face lit up at the sight of his recovered horses. "Blackwood, by God, you did it!" he exclaimed, striding forward to clap Vaughn on the shoulder. "And in record time, too." "They didn't get far," Vaughn replied modestly. "This is Miss Montgomery. She was instrumental in the recovery." Hargrove turned his beaming smile on Amelia. "Is that so? Well, my thanks to you as well, Miss Montgomery. These horses represent a significant investment." "I was happy to help," Amelia said, somewhat uncomfortable with the attention. "As promised," Hargrove continued, pulling a folded wad of bills from his vest pocket and handing it to Vaughn. $50 for the safe return of my property, worth every penny." Vaughn accepted the money with a nod. "Obliged. You'll stay for dinner tonight, of course," Hargrove insisted. "Both of you. My wife would be devastated if she didn't get to thank you personally." Vaughn glanced at Amelia, a question in his eyes. She gave a slight nod. One more night in town before setting out after her family's killers seemed reasonable. "We'd be honored," Vaughn told Hargrove. "But we'll need to get cleaned up first." Of course. 7 o'clock at our house. It's the big white one at the end of Pine Street. Can't miss it." With the horses safely delivered and payment received, Vaughn and Amelia made their way back to the boarding house. Mrs. Wilson welcomed Amelia back with raised eyebrows and knowing looks that Amelia chose to ignore. In the privacy of her room, Amelia washed away the dust of the trail and changed into her one good dress, a simple blue cotton that had belonged to her stepmother and had been hastily altered to fit Amelia's taller frame. It wasn't fashionable, but it was clean and presentable. When she descended to the front parlor, she found Vaughn waiting, almost unrecognizable in clean clothes, dark trousers, a white shirt, and a vest that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. He'd trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair, revealing a strong jawline and cheekbones that his usual trail-worn appearance obscured. He looked up as she entered, and something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or appreciation. "Miss Montgomery," he said, his voice low. "You clean up well." "As do you, Mr. Blackwood," she replied, feeling suddenly self-conscious under his gaze. The Hargrove home was indeed impossible to miss, a grand two-story affair with a wide porch and ornate trim, easily the largest house in Clearwater Springs. They were greeted at the door by Mrs. Hargrove, a plump, pleasant woman who ushered them inside with effusive thanks for the return of their horses. Dinner was a lavish affair by frontier standards: roast beef, potatoes, fresh vegetables from Mrs. Hargrove's garden, and apple pie for dessert. The conversation flowed easily, with Mr. Hargrove dominating much of it with tales of his early days in the territory. "Of course, that was before the railroad came through," he was saying as they finished their pie. "Changed everything, the railroad did. brought civilization for better or worse. Mostly better, I should think, Mrs. Hargrove interjected, though I do miss the quiet sometimes. Speaking of quiet, Mr. Hargrove said, turning to Amelia, I heard about what happened at your family's place, Miss Montgomery. A terrible business, just terrible. If there's anything Martha and I can do to help, you just say the word. Amelia set down her fork, the dessert suddenly tasteless in her mouth. Thank you, Mr. Hargrove. That's very kind. Have they caught the men responsible? Mrs. Hargrove asked, her expression sympathetic. Not yet, Amelia replied, but Mr. Blackwood has agreed to help me track them down. The Hargroves exchanged a look. Has he now? Mr. Hargrove said, raising an eyebrow at Vaughn. That's a dangerous undertaking. It is, Vaughn agreed, but necessary. Well, if anyone can find them, it's Blackwood, Hargrove told Amelia. Best tracker I've ever known. Saved my nephew from a Sioux war party 3 years back when everyone else had given him up for dead. Amelia looked at Vaughn with renewed interest. You never mentioned that. It wasn't relevant, Vaughn replied, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. The evening concluded with coffee in the Hargroves' sitting room, after which Vaughn and Amelia took their leave, walking back to the boarding house under a canopy of stars. The night was warm, the air fragrant with sage and distant pine. Mr. Hargrove seems to think highly of you, Amelia observed as they walked. Vaughn shrugged. I did a job for him once. He's a fair man who pays what he promises. And his story about you saving his nephew from a Sioux war party. Exaggerated, Vaughn said shortly. The boy got lost. I found him. The Sioux had nothing to do with it. Amelia smiled at his discomfort with the praise. Still, it seems you have quite a reputation in these parts. Reputations are often more fiction than fact. They reached the boarding house and paused at the bottom of the steps. In the moonlight, Vaughn's features were cast in silver and shadow, making him look almost otherworldly. We'll leave at first light, he said. I've arranged for supplies enough for 2 weeks on the trail. Half the money from Hargrove should cover it, and the other half, that's your share. He reached into his pocket and pulled out $25, holding it out to her. Amelia stared at the money, then back at him. But you did all the work. I just followed along. A deal's a deal, Miss Montgomery. We agreed to split the payment, and that's what we're doing. She accepted the money slowly, touched by his adherence to their agreement when he could easily have claimed a larger share. Thank you, Vaughn nodded. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we start the real work. True to his word, Vaughn was waiting outside the boarding house as dawn broke the next morning, 2 horses saddled and loaded with supplies. Amelia's mare from their previous journey had been replaced with her own horse, now rested and eager. I took the liberty of retrieving your horse from the livery, Vaughn explained. Thought you might prefer a mount you're familiar with. Thank you, Amelia said, touched by the thoughtful gesture. She patted her horse's neck affectionately. She and I have been through a lot together. They set out as the sun crested the eastern hills, heading northeast toward Amelia's destroyed homestead. The journey would take most of the day, and they rode in companionable silence for the first few hours, each lost in their own thoughts. Around midday, as they stopped to rest the horses by a small stream, Vaughn finally broached the subject that had been hanging between them. When we reach your homestead, he said carefully, it's going to be difficult. Seeing it again, looking for signs of the men who did this, it won't be easy for you. Amelia nodded, appreciating his directness. I know, but I need to do this. Yes, you do, he agreed, surprising her. Grief needs to be faced head-on. Running from it only makes it worse, trust me on that. There was something in his tone that suggested personal experience, but Amelia didn't press. Instead, she asked, what exactly will we be looking for? Signs that might tell us who these men were. direction they came from and where they went, numbers, anything they might have left behind. Vaughn hesitated, then added gently, "And we'll need to give your family a proper burial if that hasn't been done." Amelia's throat tightened. In the chaos and shock following the discovery of the homestead, she hadn't been able to face that task. I couldn't, when I found them." She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Vaughn's hand covered hers briefly, a warm, calloused touch that somehow steadied her. "We'll do it together." They reached the homestead as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western horizon. The sight of the charred ruins hit Amelia anew, grief rising like a physical force within her chest. The main house was little more than blackened timbers and ash. The barn had fared slightly better, its stone foundation and parts of the wooden structure still standing. Vaughn dismounted, scanning the area with careful eyes. "Stay here a moment," he said quietly. "Let me have a look around first." Amelia watched as he moved methodically around the property, examining the ground, the buildings, occasionally kneeling to study something more closely. His movements were those of a man who knew exactly what he was looking for, deliberate, focused, patient. After what seemed like an eternity, he returned to where she waited with the horses. "4 men," he said without preamble. "Maybe 5. They came from the northeast, probably following the old trapper's trail that runs along the ridge. They weren't in a hurry, took their time here, went through everything before setting the fire." "How can you tell all that?" Amelia asked, both impressed and disturbed by the clarity of his reading. "Tracks don't lie if you know how to read them," Vaughn replied. "And these men didn't try very hard to hide their presence. They weren't worried about pursuit." "Because they thought they'd killed everyone," Amelia said softly. Vaughn nodded grimly. "I found where your family is." He hesitated, then added, "They're behind what's left of the barn. It looks like your father tried to hold them off while your stepmother and the boys took shelter there." Amelia closed her eyes, the image too painful to bear. Her father would have fought to his last breath to protect his family. That he had failed wasn't his fault. He had been one man against many. "We should." She swallowed hard. "We should bury them before nightfall." Vaughn nodded. "I saw some tools in what's left of the barn. I'll dig the graves if you want to. Say your goodbyes." The next few hours were the hardest of Amelia's life. Vaughn worked tirelessly, digging 4 graves in the hard Wyoming soil while Amelia gathered what remained of her family and prepared them as best she could. There were no coffins, no formal clothes, no minister to speak words of comfort. Just a grieving daughter and sister, a stranger who had become an unexpected ally, and the vast, indifferent sky above. As the sun began to set, they laid Amelia's family to rest. Vaughn fashioned crude crosses from pieces of unburned wood, and Amelia marked each grave with a stone, promising herself that she would return someday to place proper markers. When it was done, Vaughn stood back, giving her privacy for her final farewells. Amelia knelt by each grave in turn, whispering words of love and remembrance. By the time she finished, twilight had deepened into dusk, and the first stars were appearing overhead. "We should make camp," Vaughn said gently when she finally rose. "Not here. There's a spot by the creek about a quarter-mile east that would serve better." Amelia nodded, grateful for his suggestion. She couldn't bear the thought of spending the night amid the ruins of her family home. They made camp in silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. Vaughn built a small fire and prepared a simple meal, but Amelia found she had no appetite. Instead, she sat wrapped in her blanket, staring into the flames and trying to come to terms with the finality of what they had done that day. "They're at peace now," Vaughn said quietly from across the fire. Amelia looked up, meeting his gaze. "Are they? Or is that just something people say to make the living feel better? I don't know, he admitted. I'm not much for religious talk, but I do know that what we did today was necessary not just for them, but for you. Proper burials aren't for the dead. They're for those left behind. His honesty was strangely comforting. No platitudes, no empty reassurances, just a simple truth that resonated with her own feelings. Thank you, she said, for helping me today. I couldn't have done it alone. Vaughn nodded, accepting her gratitude without diminishing it. Get some sleep if you can. Tomorrow we start tracking in earnest. Exhausted by the physical and emotional toll of the day, Amelia slept deeply that night, free of the nightmares that had plagued her since the attack. When she woke, the sun was already up and Vaughn was saddling the horses. I let you sleep, he explained when he saw her stir. You needed it. Thank you, she said, rising and folding her blanket. What's our plan for today? We follow their trail northeast. From what I can tell, they headed back the way they came. If we're lucky, they're still in the territory. They set out after a quick breakfast, Vaughn leading the way as he followed signs invisible to Amelia's untrained eye: broken twigs, displaced rocks, the occasional hoof print preserved in a patch of soft earth. By midday, they had reached the ridge Vaughn had mentioned, where an old trapper's trail wound its way through a series of low hills. The trail's fresher here, Vaughn observed, dismounting to examine some marks on the ground. They didn't split up after leaving your homestead. That's good, means we're only tracking one group. How old would you say these tracks are? Amelia asked. Vaughn considered this. Hard to say exactly. 10 days, maybe 2 weeks. Recent enough that we have a chance of catching up to them, especially if they've settled somewhere. They continued northeast, the landscape gradually changing from rolling prairie to more rugged terrain, rocky outcroppings, deeper ravines, and stands of pine and aspen where the elevation rose. The beauty of it might have captivated Amelia under different circumstances, but now she saw it only as ground to be covered in pursuit of justice. As the sun began to set, they made camp in a sheltered hollow near a small spring. While Vaughn tended to the horses, Amelia gathered wood for a fire and laid out their bedrolls. There was an easy rhythm to their partnership now, each anticipating the other's needs without discussion. Over their evening meal of beans and jerky, Vaughn surprised her by asking, "What will you do after this is over? After we find the men responsible?" Amelia looked up from her plate. She hadn't thought that far ahead. Her focus had been entirely on finding her family's killers. I don't know, she admitted. I suppose I could try to rebuild the homestead, but it wouldn't be the same, Vaughn finished for her. No, it wouldn't. She stared into the fire. I have some relatives back east, my mother's sister in Boston. I could go there, I suppose. Or stay in Clearwater Springs and work for Mrs. Wilson. Neither of those options sounds particularly appealing to you, Vaughn observed. Amelia smiled faintly. Is it that obvious? You don't strike me as someone who'd be content serving meals to travelers or living in a city back east. What do I strike you as then? Vaughn studied her for a long moment, the firelight playing across his features. Someone who belongs out here. Someone who understands this country and respects it, but isn't afraid of it either. His assessment was surprisingly accurate, and Amelia found herself touched by his perception. And what about you? What will you do after this is over? Same as always, he said with a shrug. Find the next job, the next trail to follow. Doesn't that get lonely? Always moving, never staying in one place long enough to. She hesitated, then finished, to form attachments. Something flickered in Vaughn's eyes, a moment of vulnerability quickly masked. Attachments are a luxury in this line of work. They can be used against you, or lost. That sounds like the voice of experience, Amelia said gently. Vaughn was quiet for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "My wife and daughter were killed while I was away on Marshal business. Influenza. By the time I got the telegram and made it home, they were already in the ground." The simple, stark statement hit Amelia like a physical blow. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "It was a long time ago," he said, his tone suggesting the topic was closed. But Amelia understood now his reluctance to form attachments, his initial hesitation to help her, even his expertise in tracking. It all made a terrible kind of sense. He had lost everything once, and rather than risk that pain again, he had chosen a life of constant movement. They finished their meal in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As they prepared for sleep, Vaughn taking the first watch as usual, Amelia found herself seeing him in a new light, not just as a skilled tracker or a temporary ally, but as a man who had suffered losses as profound as her own. The next morning brought a change in the weather, dark clouds gathering on the horizon and a chill wind that carried the promise of rain. They broke camp quickly, hoping to cover as much ground as possible before the storm hit. The trail led them deeper into increasingly rough country, the raiders apparently heading for the relative lawlessness of the territories to the north. By midday, the first drops of rain began to fall, and Vaughn called a halt beneath a rocky overhang that offered some shelter. "We'll wait it out," he said, dismounting and helping Amelia do the same. "No point trying to follow a trail that's being washed away." They huddled beneath the overhang as the rain intensified, becoming a steady downpour that transformed the landscape around them. Water ran in rivulets down the rocky slopes, and the distant sound of thunder echoed through the hills. Confined to the small space, Amelia was acutely aware of Vaughn's proximity, the warmth of him beside her, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. There was something comforting about his presence, a solidity that made the wild elements seem less threatening. "This reminds me of when I was a child," she said, watching the rain. "My father and I were caught in a storm like this while checking fence lines. We took shelter in an old trapper's cabin, barely more than a lean-to, really. We were stuck there for hours, so he taught me to play poker with a deck of cards he kept in his saddlebag." Vaughn smiled at the story. "Did you win, eventually?" He didn't believe in letting children win just to spare their feelings, said it didn't prepare them for the real world. Amelia smiled at the memory. He was right, of course. The real world doesn't let anyone win just to be kind. "No," Vaughn agreed. "It doesn't." They fell silent again, watching the rain. After a while, Vaughn reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small flask. He unscrewed the cap and offered it to Amelia. "Whiskey," he explained. "Not much, but it'll help with the chill." Amelia hesitated, then accepted the flask. The liquor burned a path down her throat, warming her from the inside out. She handed it back with a nod of thanks. "My father would have been scandalized," she said with a small smile. "He didn't approve of women drinking." "Your father isn't here," Vaughn pointed out gently. "And you're a grown woman capable of making your own decisions." There was something liberating in his words, an acknowledgement of her autonomy that she hadn't realized she needed. For all his protectiveness on the trail, Vaughn had never treated her as anything less than an equal partner in their endeavor. "Yes," she agreed. "I am." The rain continued through the afternoon and into the evening, forcing them to spend the night beneath the rocky overhang. They ate a cold dinner of jerky and hardtack, neither willing to risk a fire that might draw attention in the gathering darkness. As night fell, the temperature dropped further, and Amelia found herself shivering despite her heavy coat. Without a word, Vaughn moved closer, offering his body heat. After a moment's hesitation, she leaned into him, grateful for the warmth. "Thank you," she murmured. "No need for thanks," he replied, his voice a low rumble she could feel through his chest. "It's practical, nothing more." But as they sat there, huddled together against the cold and dark, Amelia knew it was more than mere practicality. There was a growing connection between them forged through shared hardship and mutual respect, strengthened by the vulnerabilities they had revealed to each other. Morning brought clear skies and a world transformed by the rain, vegetation greener, colors more vivid, the very air seeming cleaner and fresher. They set out early, Vaughn once again following the trail with unerring precision despite the rain's attempt to erase it. By midday, they had reached an area of rocky foothills that marked the transition to more mountainous terrain. Vaughn called a halt at the top of a rise, studying the valley below with narrowed eyes. "What is it?" Amelia asked, noting his sudden tension. "Smoke," he said, pointing to a thin gray plume rising from a cluster of trees several miles distant. "And it's no campfire, that's a chimney." Amelia squinted in the direction he indicated. "A cabin or a small homestead. Either way, it's worth investigating." Vaughn turned to her, his expression serious. "From here on, we need to be more cautious. If those are our raiders, they'll have lookouts posted." They proceeded more slowly, taking advantage of the terrain to conceal their approach. As they drew closer to the source of the smoke, they left the horses hidden in a stand of aspens and continued on foot, moving from cover to cover with a stealth that impressed Amelia. The source of the smoke proved to be a small, crude cabin nestled in a clearing surrounded by pine trees. A lean-to stable stood to one side. Housing several horses, Amelia's heart leapt when she recognized one as her father's prized stallion, a distinctive dapple gray with a white blaze. "That's our horse," she whispered to Vaughn as they crouched behind a fallen log about 100 yards from the cabin. "The gray one, he belonged to my father." Vaughn nodded grimly. "Then we've found them. I count 4 horses, which matches the number of men I estimated from the tracks." "What now?" Amelia asked, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and anticipation. "We wait," Vaughn said simply. "Watch, learn their routine, then we make a plan." They retreated to where they'd left their horses and made a cold camp well away from the cabin, using a small ravine for cover. As night fell, they took turns watching the cabin, noting when lights appeared in the windows and when they were extinguished. 4 men, Vaughn confirmed when he returned from his second observation. "They seem settled and this isn't a temporary camp. My guess is they use this place as a base for their raids, then return here where they are relatively isolated." "So what's our plan?" Amelia asked, keeping her voice low despite the distance between them and the cabin. Vaughn considered this. "Tomorrow, we'll watch them again, try to identify patterns when they leave, when they return, if they ever split up. Then we'll decide." "Decide what?" His eyes met hers in the darkness. "Whether we try to take them alive or not." The implication hung between them. Amelia had known from the beginning that finding her family's killers might mean killing them. She had thought she was prepared for that reality, but now, faced with the actual prospect, she found herself conflicted. "I want them to face justice," she said finally. "Real justice, not just revenge." Vaughn nodded slowly. "That's admirable, but you need to understand men like these, they won't surrender peacefully. If we try to take them alive, it increases our risk significantly." "I understand that," Amelia said, meeting his gaze steadily, "but I don't want to become like them. I don't want to be someone who kills without giving a chance for surrender first." A ghost of a smile touched Vaughn's lips. "You're a better person than most in this situation would be." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "We'll try it your way. But if it comes down to them or us, I won't hesitate, and neither should you." Amelia nodded, accepting the compromise. "Thank you." They spent the next day observing the cabin and its occupants from various vantage points. The men inside seemed to be following no particular schedule. They emerged occasionally to tend to the horses or relieve themselves, but otherwise remained inside, presumably sleeping off whatever debauchery had occupied their previous night. By late afternoon, Vaughn had formulated a plan. Two of them just left, heading east, he reported after returning from his observation post. That leaves two in the cabin. This might be our best opportunity. What do you propose? Amelia asked. We approach under cover of dusk. I'll take the front, you cover the rear in case they try to escape that way. We'll call them out, give them a chance to surrender as you wanted. If they refuse, we do what we have to, Amelia finished for him. Vaughn nodded. Exactly. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the clearing, they made their final preparations. Vaughn checked and rechecked his pistol and rifle, while Amelia did the same with her father's rifle. Stay behind cover, Vaughn instructed her. Don't expose yourself unnecessarily. And if shooting starts, aim for the center of the body. It's the largest target. Amelia nodded, her mouth dry with apprehension. I understand. They approached the cabin from different directions, using the gathering darkness and the surrounding trees for cover. Vaughn positioned himself behind a large pine about 30 yards from the front door, while Amelia took up a similar position covering the cabin's rear window and door. When they were in position, Vaughn gave a low whistle, their agreed-upon signal. Then he called out, his voice carrying clearly in the still evening air. In the cabin, this is Vaughn Blackwood, former U.S. Marshal. You're surrounded. Come out with your hands up, and you'll be taken alive to stand trial for your crimes. Silence followed his announcement. Then came the sound of hurried movement from within the cabin, followed by a crash of breaking glass the rear window. Amelia tensed, raising her rifle as a figure appeared in the window frame, attempting to climb out. Stop right there, she shouted, stepping partially from behind her tree to make herself visible. Hands where I can see them. The man froze, half in and half out of the window. In the dim light, Amelia could make out a bearded face, a filthy shirt, and eyes wide with surprise at finding himself confronted. Ain't no Marshal out here, he snarled, recovering from his surprise. Just a girl playing. At the rest of his sentence was lost as gunfire erupted from the front of the cabin, a rapid exchange of shots that told Amelia that Vaughn was engaged with the other occupant. The man at the window used the distraction to lunge forward, dropping to the ground and rolling toward the cover of a woodpile. Amelia fired, her shot splintering wood where the man had been a moment before. He returned fire, the bullet whizzing past her ear close enough that she felt its passage. She ducked back behind her tree, heart hammering in her chest, more gunfire from the front of the cabin than a man's cry of pain. Amelia couldn't tell if it was Vaughn or one of the raiders, and the uncertainty sent a spike of fear through her. The man behind the woodpile fired again, the bullet embedding itself in the tree trunk inches from Amelia's head. She took a deep breath, remembering Vaughn's instructions: aim for the center of the body. When the man shifted slightly, exposing his shoulder as he prepared to fire again, Amelia squeezed the trigger. The rifle's recoil slammed into her shoulder, but her aim was true. The man jerked backward, his own shot going wild as her bullet found its mark. He slumped against the woodpile, his gun falling from suddenly limp fingers. Amelia stared, a strange numbness spreading through her as she realized what she had done. She had just shot a man, possibly killed him. The thought should have horrified her, but all she felt was a cold certainty that it had been necessary. Amelia, Vaughn's voice calling from the front of the cabin. Are you all right? I'm here, she called back, her voice steadier than she would have expected. One down back here. Same here, Vaughn replied. Stay where you are until I check inside. A few moments later, Vaughn appeared around the corner of the cabin, his pistol still drawn. He glanced at the man slumped against the woodpile, then at Amelia. You hit him clean, he observed. He's still breathing, but he won't be causing any more trouble. Relief washed over Amelia. She hadn't killed him after all. What about the other one? Dead, Vaughn said flatly. He didn't give me a choice, came out shooting. He approached the wounded man, kicking his gun well out of reach before kneeling to check his injury. Shoulder wound, painful, but he'll live to stand trial. The man groaned, his eyes fluttering open to focus hatefully on Amelia. You shot me, you bitch, he slurred. You killed my family, Amelia replied, a cold anger replacing the numbness. Consider yourself lucky I didn't shoot to kill. Vaughn bound the man's wound with strips torn from his own shirt, then tied his hands securely. The cabin's clear, he told Amelia. Let's get him inside where we can keep an eye on him. The other two could return any time. They half-dragged, half-carried the wounded raider into the cabin, propping him against a wall while Vaughn secured his feet as well. The interior was filthy, empty bottles, discarded food and personal items strewn about in a display of careless living. Amelia's gaze was drawn to a trunk in one corner, its lid open to reveal contents that made her blood run cold. Her stepmother's silver brush set, her father's pocket watch, even a small wooden toy that had belonged to one of the twins. They kept trophies, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Vaughn followed her gaze and nodded grimly. Men like these often do. It's not about the value of the items, it's about the power they feel in taking them. The wounded man laughed, a harsh sound that ended in a cough. Should have seen how they begged, he taunted. The woman especially, pleaded for the brats' lives right up until the end. Rage surged through Amelia, a white-hot fury unlike anything she had ever experienced. Before she knew what she was doing, she had crossed the room and struck the man across the face with the back of her hand, hard enough that his head snapped to the side. Amelia, Vaughn said sharply, catching her arm before she could strike again. That's enough. He's not worth it. She turned to face him, trembling with anger. Did you hear what he said? What they did, I heard, Vaughn replied, his voice gentle but firm. And he'll pay for it, but not like this. Not with you becoming something you're not. The rage drained out of her as suddenly as it had come, leaving her feeling hollow and exhausted. She nodded once, then stepped back. What about the other two? She asked, changing the subject. They could return any minute. We'll be ready if they do, Vaughn assured her. But first, let's see if our friend here is feeling talkative. He turned to the wounded man. Your partners, when do you expect them back? The man spat on the floor. Go to hell. Vaughn sighed, then drew his knife, a wicked-looking blade that glinted in the dim light of the cabin's single lantern. I was hoping we could do this the easy way, he said conversationally. But I've found that men like you respond better to more direct methods. Fear flickered in the man's eyes as Vaughn approached with the knife. Now, wait a minute, he stammered. You said you were a marshal. Former marshal, Vaughn corrected. And out here, there's no one to stop me from doing whatever is necessary to get the information I need. Amelia watched this exchange with a mixture of horror and fascination. She knew Vaughn was bluffing at least. She was fairly certain he was, but the wounded raider clearly believed the threat. They went to town, the man blurted, his eyes fixed on the knife. Clearwater Springs, for supplies and women. They won't be back until tomorrow, maybe the day after. Vaughn nodded as if this confirmed what he already suspected. And is there anyone else we should know about? Any other members of your group who might be coming here? No, just the four of us, the man insisted. We're not a gang or nothing like that, just partners. Partners in murder, Amelia said coldly. The man's gaze shifted to her, a mixture of hate and fear in his eyes. It wasn't supposed to go that way, he muttered. Just wanted their valuables, but the old man pulled a gun and then everything went to hell. So you burned their home and killed them all, Amelia said, including 2 children. That wasn't me, the man protested. That was Roy's doing. He's the one who likes the killing. The rest of us just wanted the stuff. Vaughn and Amelia exchanged a glance. Roy, Vaughn repeated. Would that be one of the men who went to town? The wounded man nodded. Yeah, Roy Gantry, he's the leader, so to speak. Other one's his brother Lyle, and you are, Marcus. Marcus Doyle, Vaughn nodded, sheathing his knife. Well, Marcus Doyle, you're under arrest for murder, robbery, and arson. When your friends return, they'll be joining you. Marcus snorted. You ain't taking Roy alive. Man's crazy. Killed 3 men in Colorado last year just for looking at him wrong. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, Vaughn said. For now, you should worry about yourself. That shoulder's going to need proper medical attention if you don't want to lose the arm. He turned to Amelia. We need to prepare for when the others return. Given what our friend here has told us, I think it's best if we set up an ambush. They spent the next several hours securing the cabin and preparing for the Gantry brothers' return. Vaughn moved the body of the dead raider, a man Marcus identified as Elijah Cooper, to the lean-to stable, covering it with a tarp. They then positioned themselves to wait Vaughn in the front room of the cabin, Amelia in the small bedroom at the back, both with clear lines of fire to the doors. Night fell, but the Gantry brothers did not return. Marcus, secured to a chair in the main room, eventually fell into a fitful sleep, moaning occasionally as his wound pained him. Vaughn and Amelia took turns keeping watch, one resting while the other remained alert. During one of these watches, as Amelia sat by the window looking out at the star-filled sky, Vaughn approached quietly and sat beside her. You should try to get some sleep, he said. It might be a long wait. Amelia shook her head. I couldn't sleep now if I tried. Vaughn studied her profile in the dim light. You did well today. Many people would have frozen in that situation. I shot a man, she said, the reality of it still not fully processed in her mind. You did what was necessary to survive, Vaughn corrected gently. There's no shame in that. Amelia turned to look at him. Is it always like this feeling of, I don't know how to describe it, like I'm standing outside myself watching someone else go through these motions? It's shock, Vaughn explained. Your mind's way of protecting itself from the trauma. It will pass eventually. And then what? Then you'll feel it all, the fear, the anger, the grief, but you'll survive that too. He hesitated, then added, I'll be here to help you through it if you want. The simple offer touched something deep within Amelia, a place that had felt numb since finding her family's bodies. Thank you, she whispered, her voice catching slightly. They sat in silence for a time, the night sounds of the wilderness surrounding them, distant owl calls, the rustle of wind through pine needles, the occasional cry of a coyote. There was a strange intimacy in this shared vigil, a connection forged through danger and purpose. Earlier, Amelia said finally, when you threatened Marcus with the knife, would you have actually used it? Vaughn was quiet for a long moment. No, he said at last. Despite what he and his friends did to your family, torture isn't something I could bring myself to do, not anymore. Not anymore, Amelia repeated. So there was a time when you could. A shadow crossed Vaughn's face. The war changes men. I did things then that I've spent years trying to forget. The Civil War, Amelia asked, surprised. Vaughn didn't look old enough to have fought in a conflict that had ended 13 years earlier. I was young, he said, answering her unspoken question. Lied about my age to enlist. 16 when I joined up, 17 when I killed my first man. By the time it was over, I'd lost count. The quiet admission gave Amelia a new understanding of the man beside her, the source of the shadows she sometimes glimpsed in his eyes, the reason for his skill with weapons and his comfort with violence when necessary. That's why you became a marshal, she guessed. To use those skills for something good, Vaughn nodded. That was the idea. Didn't always work out that way in practice. But you try, Amelia said softly. That's what matters. He looked at her then, really looked at her, with an intensity that made her breath catch. You're an unusual woman, Amelia Montgomery. Is that a compliment? She asked, trying to lighten the suddenly charged atmosphere. Yes, he said simply. It is. Morning came with no sign of the Gantry brothers. Marcus's condition had worsened overnight, his wound showing signs of infection despite Vaughn's basic treatment. By midday, he was delirious with fever, alternating between unconsciousness and periods of rambling, incoherent speech. He needs a doctor, Amelia said, placing a cool cloth on the man's forehead. Despite everything Marcus had done, she couldn't bring herself to watch him suffer without trying to help. I know, Vaughn agreed, but we can't leave, not with the Gantry still out there. And we can't take him to town for the same reason. They were discussing their limited options when the sound of approaching horses reached them. Vaughn moved quickly to the window, peering out cautiously. 2 riders, he reported. Coming in fast. This is it. They took their positions, Vaughn behind the door, Amelia at the window with her rifle. The plan was simple. Call for surrender and be ready when it was inevitably refused. The riders pulled up in front of the cabin, dismounting with the casual confidence of men who expected no trouble. One was tall and lean, with a shock of red hair visible beneath his hat. The other was shorter, stockier, but with the same distinctive coloring. The Gantry brothers, without a doubt. Something's not right, the taller one, presumably Roy, said, his hand moving to his gun. Elijah's horse is still here, but I don't see Marcus's. Maybe they went hunting, the shorter brother suggested. Both of them, leaving the cabin unguarded. Roy shook his head. No, something's wrong. His instincts were good, Amelia had to admit, but they were too late to save him. Vaughn's voice rang out from inside the cabin. Roy and Lyle Gantry, you're surrounded. Throw down your weapons and put your hands in the air. The reaction was immediate and violent. Both men drew their guns, diving for cover behind a water trough as bullets from Vaughn's rifle splintered the wood around them. Who the hell are you? Roy shouted. Vaughn Blackwood, former U.S. Marshal. I'm here about the Montgomery family. A bark of laughter came from behind the trough. The Homesteaders. That was weeks ago. You're a bit late, Marshal. Better late than never, Vaughn replied calmly. Your friends Cooper and Doyle are already accounted for. Cooper's dead and Doyle's wounded but alive to stand trial. You can join him or you can join Cooper. Your choice. There was a moment of tense silence, then Roy called back. Where's Doyle? Let me talk to him. He's in no condition to talk, Vaughn answered. Fever's got him delirious. Last coherent thing he said was that the whole thing was your idea, especially killing the children. This was a calculated lie designed to sow discord between the brothers. It worked. Amelia heard Lyle's voice, lower but still audible. You said no one would get hurt, Roy, you promised. Shut up, Roy hissed. He's lying, trying to turn us against each other. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Amelia could see the brothers' position from her window, and she noticed Lyle edging slightly away from Roy, as if no longer certain he wanted to share his fate. I'm going to count to 3, Vaughn called. After that, we start shooting and we don't stop until you're both dead or surrender. 1. Go to hell, Roy shouted. 2. Roy, maybe we should, Lyle began, only to be cut off by his brother. Shut up. We can take them. 3. Vaughn fired, his shot hitting the water trough and sending splinters flying. Amelia joined in, her rifle cracking sharply as she aimed at the spot where she'd last seen movement. The gantries returned fire, their bullets thudding into the cabin's walls and shattering the window beside Amelia, forcing her to duck for cover. The exchange continued for several minutes, neither side gaining an advantage. Amelia realized they were at a stalemate. The brothers couldn't approach the cabin without exposing themselves, but neither could Vaughn and Amelia force them from their cover. Then something unexpected happened. Gantry stood up, hands raised. "I surrender," he shouted. "Don't shoot." "Lyle, you coward," Roy snarled, grabbing for his brother's leg to pull him back down. But Lyle stepped away, keeping his hands visible. "It's over, Roy. I'm not dying out here for your mistakes." "Drop your gun and walk toward the cabin slowly," Vaughn instructed. Lyle complied, removing his pistol and letting it fall to the ground before taking tentative steps toward the cabin. Roy, left alone behind the water trough, let loose a string of curses. "You're dead, Lyle. You hear me? Dead." What happened next unfolded with terrible swiftness. Roy rose from behind the trough, gun aimed not at the cabin but at his brother's back. Amelia saw his intention and acted without thinking, her rifle coming up as she squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed across the clearing. Roy Gantry staggered, a look of surprise crossing his face as a dark stain spread across his chest. He fired once, wildly, the bullet going high into the trees, then collapsed. Lyle Gantry stood frozen, staring at his fallen brother. Then, slowly, he continued his walk toward the cabin, hands still raised. Vaughn emerged cautiously, his rifle trained on Lyle. "On your knees," he ordered. "Hands behind your head." Lyle complied without protest, all fight gone out of him. As Vaughn secured him with rope, Amelia approached Roy's body, her rifle still ready in case this was some elaborate ruse. But one look confirmed what she already knew: her shot had been true, striking him in the heart. Roy Gantry was dead. Amelia stood over him, expecting to feel something: triumph, perhaps, or satisfaction at having avenged her family. Instead, there was only a hollow emptiness, a sense that no amount of justice or revenge could ever fill the void left by her loved one's deaths. Vaughn appeared at her side, gently taking the rifle from her hands. "It's done," he said quietly. "You did what you had to do." She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. After a moment, she turned away from Roy's body and walked back to the cabin, leaving Vaughn to deal with the aftermath. Inside, Lyle sat bound to a chair, his head hanging in defeat. Marcus Doyle still lay on his makeshift bed, oblivious to everything in his fever-induced delirium. Amelia sat at the small table, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. When Vaughn returned, having moved Roy's body to lie beside Cooper's in the lean-to, he found her still sitting there, staring at nothing. "We need to get these two to Clearwater Springs," he said gently. "The sheriff can hold them until the circuit judge comes through." Amelia looked up at him. "Will they hang?" "Almost certainly," Vaughn replied. "Murder, especially of children, is a hanging offense in every territory. The evidence is clear, and we have Doyle's confession." She nodded, accepting this. "Good." "Amelia," Vaughn said, kneeling beside her chair to look her in the eye, "it's over. Your family has justice now." "Justice," she repeated, the word tasting strange on her tongue. "It doesn't bring them back." "No," he agreed softly. "It doesn't. But it ensures these men can never hurt anyone else the way they hurt your family." There was truth in that, Amelia acknowledged. A small comfort, perhaps, but not insignificant. "When do we leave?" "As soon as we can get these two ready for travel." "Doyle will need to lie across a horse he's in no condition to ride. Lyle can ride on his own, tied to his saddle." They worked quickly, preparing for the journey back to Clearwater Springs. The Gantry brothers' horses would carry their living captives, while Vaughn's and Amelia's would bear the bodies of Roy and Cooper grim cargo, but necessary for proof of what had transpired. As they prepared to depart, Amelia took one last look around the cabin that had served as the raiders' hideout. Her gaze fell on the trunk containing her family's possessions, small, precious mementos of lives cut short. She gathered them carefully, wrapping her stepmother's silver brush in a cloth and tucking her father's pocket watch into her own pocket. The wooden toy she held for a long moment, remembering the small hands that had once played with it, before placing it with the other items in her saddlebag. "Ready?" Vaughn asked, watching her with understanding in his eyes. Amelia nodded. "Ready." The journey back to Clearwater Springs took a full day and a half, slowed by their grim cargo and Marcus Doyle's deteriorating condition. They traveled in mostly silence, while Gantry offering no resistance or conversation, seemingly resigned to his fate. Sheriff Barnes was visibly shocked when they rode into town, the bodies of 2 men draped over their horses and 2 live prisoners in tow. A crowd quickly gathered, news of the Montgomery raiders' capture spreading through Clearwater Springs like wildfire. "By God," the sheriff exclaimed, taking in the scene. "You actually did it." "These men murdered the Montgomery family," Vaughn stated flatly. "They've confessed. Doyle needs a doctor immediately if he's to survive to stand trial." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Marcus Doyle was taken to the doctor's home. Lil Gantry was locked in the town jail, and the bodies of Roy and Cooper were laid out in the undertaker's back room for documentation before burial. Vaughn handled most of the details, giving a full account to Sheriff Barnes while Amelia sat quietly in the sheriff's office, still processing everything that had happened. By evening, the excitement had died down somewhat, though Amelia was aware of the curious and sometimes admiring glances cast her way as she walked with Vaughn back to the boarding house. News of her role in bringing her family's killers to justice had spread, and the townsfolk viewed her with a new respect. Mrs. Wilson fussed over them both, insisting they needed proper meals and hot baths after their ordeal. For once, Amelia didn't resist the motherly attention, allowing herself to be guided to her old room and provided with hot water and clean towels. The bath was a simple luxury that felt almost decadent after days on the trail. Amelia soaked until the water grew cool, watching the grime and blood, both literal and figurative, swirl away. When she finally emerged, dressed in clean clothes, she felt somehow both lighter and more substantial, as if she had shed one version of herself and stepped into another. She found Vaughn waiting in the boarding house's small parlor, also freshly bathed and dressed in clean clothes. He stood as she entered, and for a moment they simply looked at each other, acknowledging without words all they had been through together. "Mrs. Wilson says dinner will be ready soon," Vaughn said finally. "She's made a feast apparently in honor of our return." Amelia smiled faintly. "That's kind of her. She thinks you're a hero," Vaughn told her. "So does half the town from what I've gathered. The story's already growing, with each telling soon they'll have you single-handedly capturing all 4 raiders while I stood by and watched." "That's ridiculous," Amelia protested. "I couldn't have done any of it without you." Vaughn's expression softened. "You could have. It might have taken longer, been more difficult, but you would have found a way. You're stronger than you know, Amelia." The sincerity in his voice made something warm unfurl in her chest. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing that." Dinner was indeed a feast: roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. Mrs. Wilson had invited several other boarders to join them, and the meal became something of an impromptu celebration. Amelia found herself recounting parts of their journey, carefully edited to exclude the more violent details, while Vaughn added occasional comments or clarifications. By the time the meal ended, Amelia felt exhaustion tugging at her, the events of the past days finally catching up to her. She excused herself and retreated to her room, falling into a deep, dreamless sleep almost as soon as her head touched the pillow. The next morning, she woke to bright sunlight streaming through her window and the realization that, for the first time since discovering her family's fate, she had slept through the night without nightmares. It wasn't healing, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of it. She dressed and went downstairs to find Vaughn already at breakfast, deep in conversation with Sheriff Barnes. They both looked up as she entered, and the sheriff rose to his feet. "Miss Montgomery," he greeted her, his manner more respectful than it had been during their first encounter. "I was just telling Mr. Blackwood that the circuit judge will be here in 2 weeks. He'll want your testimony against Doyle and Gantry." "Of course," Amelia agreed. "How is Doyle?" "Touch and go, according to Doc Miller. The infection's bad, but he's young and strong. Doctor thinks he'll pull through." "Good," Amelia said. "He deserves to face justice properly." Sheriff Barnes nodded, clearly approving of her response. "Well, I'll leave you to your breakfast. Mr. Blackwood knows where to find me if you have any questions." After he left, Amelia took a seat across from Vaughn, accepting the coffee Mrs. Wilson promptly brought over. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now," Vaughn said, "you have some decisions to make. About your future. The homestead. Whether you stay here or move on." Amelia stared into her coffee cup, considering this. "I'm not sure I can go back to the homestead, not to live. Too many memories." "Understandable," Vaughn said. "You could sell it, use the money to start fresh somewhere else." "Perhaps." She looked up at him. "What about you?" "What will you do now?" Vaughn hesitated, and for the first time since she'd met him, he seemed uncertain. "I've been offered a job escorting a cattle buyer to Montana next week. Good pay." "I see," Amelia said, trying to ignore the disappointment that washed over her. Of course he would move on, that was his life, going from one job to the next, never staying in one place for long. "When would you leave?" "I haven't accepted yet," Vaughn replied, watching her face carefully. "I wanted to make sure you'd be all right first." "I'll be fine," Amelia assured him, though she wasn't entirely convinced of this herself. "You've done more than enough for me already." Vaughn's expression was unreadable. "Is that what you want, for me to leave?" The question caught her off guard. I assumed you would want to." "That's your life, isn't it? Always moving, never staying." "It has been," he acknowledged. "But lives can change, people can change." He hesitated, then added quietly, "if they have reason to." Something in his tone made Amelia's heart beat faster. "And do you have reason to?" she asked, hardly daring to breathe. Vaughn met her gaze directly. "I think I might," he said simply. "If you wanted me to stay." The implications of his words hung between them, not quite a declaration, but close enough that Amelia couldn't misinterpret his meaning. In the short time they'd known each other, something profound had developed between them, a connection forged in shared danger and mutual respect, deepening into something neither had anticipated. "I don't want to be something you feel obligated to," Amelia said carefully. "I'm grateful for your help, but gratitude isn't about gratitude," Vaughn interrupted gently. "It's about who you are, who we are together." Mrs. Wilson chose that moment to approach with plates of eggs and bacon, effectively ending their conversation. They ate in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. After breakfast, they walked together through town, eventually finding themselves at the small church that stood at the edge of Clearwater Springs. Its simple white steeple reached toward the clear blue sky, a symbol of faith and community in this frontier town. They sat on a bench beneath an old oak tree that shaded the churchyard, watching as townsfolk went about their morning business. In the distance, the mountains rose in majestic serenity, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer heat. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier," Amelia began, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "About lives changing." Vaughn nodded, waiting for her to continue. "My life has already changed irrevocably. I can't go back to who I was before." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But I'm not sure who I am now or who I want to be." "That's understandable," Vaughn said. "You've been through more in the past few weeks than most people experience in a lifetime." "Yes, and through it all you've been there." Amelia turned to face him directly. "You've seen me at my worst, grieving, angry, even violent, and you're still here." "I am," he agreed quietly. "Why?" The question was simple but laden with meaning. Vaughn was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the distant mountains. "After my wife and daughter died," he finally said, "I thought that part of my life was over. The part where I connected with people, cared about them, allowed myself to be vulnerable. It was easier to keep moving, to take jobs that kept me busy and alone." He looked at her then, his blue eyes intense in the morning light. "And then I met you. You were broken, yes, but also strong in a way I recognized. You reminded me that grief doesn't have to be the end of everything." Amelia felt tears prick at her eyes. "I'm still grieving," she whispered. "I still feel broken." "I know," Vaughn said gently, "and that's all right. Healing takes time, but you don't have to do it alone." He reached out, taking her hand in his, a simple gesture, but one that felt momentous in its meaning. "I'm not asking for promises, Amelia. I'm just asking for a chance to see if what started between us might grow into something worth staying for." Amelia looked down at their joined hands as large and weathered, hers smaller but equally calloused from years of work. Two people shaped by hardship, now finding solace in each other's presence. "I'm not used to this," she admitted, "to someone being gentle with me, with my feelings." "Life hasn't been gentle." "I know," Vaughn said, his voice soft. "I understand that better than most. But maybe that's what we both need now, a little gentleness, after all the harshness we've endured." Amelia met his gaze, finding in it a reflection of her own longing for connection, for a future that held more than just survival. "Then I'll be gentle forever," she whispered. Vaughn's expression softened, a smile touching his lips. "As will I," he promised, "for as long as you'll allow it." He leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Amelia didn't move, her heart racing as his lips met hers in a kiss that was indeed gentle, a promise, a beginning, a healing balm for wounds still raw. When they parted, Amelia felt something settle within her, not completion, not yet, but a sense that completion was possible. That joy was possible, even after such profound loss. "So," she said, a small smile playing at her lips, "no cattle buyer in Montana." Vaughn laughed, the sound warming her more than the summer sun overhead. "No cattle buyer," he confirmed, "though we should probably figure out what we are going to do. Practical matters." "Practical matters," Amelia repeated, nodding. "Well, I still have a homestead, even if I don't want to live there. And you have skills that are always in demand in these parts." "I was thinking," Vaughn said carefully, "that the territorial governor has been looking for a new marshal for this region. Sheriff Barnes mentioned it yesterday. Said he'd put in a good word for me if I was interested." "A marshal," Amelia mused. "That would mean staying in one place, having roots." "It would," Vaughn agreed. "It's been a long time since I've had that. Might take some getting used to, for both of us," Amelia said. "But I think I'd like to try." Vaughn's smile was like sunrise after a long night. "Then we'll try together." 2 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Amelia stood on the porch of a modest house on the outskirts of Clearwater Springs, watching as Vaughn approached on horseback. The house was new, built on land purchased with the proceeds from selling her family's homestead, and while it wasn't large, it was theirs. Marcus Doyle and Lyle Gantry had been tried, convicted, and hanged for their crimes against the Montgomery family. Amelia had testified at their trial, facing them with a strength that impressed even the hardened circuit judge. The town had rallied around her, offering support and, eventually, acceptance as one of their own. Vaughn had accepted the position as territorial marshal, his jurisdiction covering Clearwater Springs and the surrounding region. The job kept him busy, but allowed him to return home most nights to her, to the life they were building together. It wasn't perfect. They both still carried scars from their pasts. Amelia sometimes woke in the night, haunted by memories of fire and gunshots. Vaughn occasionally grew distant, retreating into himself when the weight of his responsibilities pressed too heavily. But they were learning to be gentle with each other's wounds, learning to build something new amid the ashes of what they had lost. As Vaughn dismounted and climbed the steps to join her on the porch, Amelia felt a surge of gratitude for this unexpected second chance at happiness. He smiled as he reached her, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way she'd come to love. "Mrs. Blackwood," he greeted her, the title still new enough to bring a flush to her cheeks. Their wedding had been small, just the two of them, the preacher, and a handful of friends from town, but meaningful in its simplicity. "Marshal Blackwood," she returned with a smile of her own. "How was your day?" "Quiet," he replied, drawing her into his arms. No desperados, no cattle rustlers, not even a drunk cowboy to contend with. Downright peaceful. "Peaceful sounds nice," Amelia said, leaning into his embrace. Vaughn's arms tightened around her, his voice dropping to a murmur against her hair. "It does, doesn't it?" "Never thought I'd say that, but it does." They stood together as the sun began to set, painting the Wyoming sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold. The future stretched before them, uncertain, as all futures are, but facing it together made it seem less daunting, more filled with possibility. "I love you," Vaughn said quietly, the words still new between them but no less sincere for their novelty. Amelia turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to touch his cheek. "And I love you," she replied, "for your strength, your patience, and most of all for your gentleness." His smile was tender as he bent to kiss her, a kiss that held the promise of all the days to come, days of building, healing, and loving. Days of the gentleness they had both, against all odds, found in each other's arms. In the wild, untamed territory of Wyoming, where life was often harsh and unforgiving, they had discovered the most unexpected truth of all, that sometimes the strongest people are those who learn to be gentle, and the deepest healing comes from allowing oneself to be healed by another's touch. As twilight deepened around them, Amelia and Vaughn Blackwood entered their home together, closing the door on the world outside and embracing the future they had chosen, one built not on vengeance or regret, but on the quiet, revolutionary power of gentleness that would, indeed, last forever.